Hello and welcome to another episode of The Defenders on Sansad TV. And in this episode, we are going to look at India's increasing footprint in the export market of defense products. India has been known traditionally as a very large importer of weaponry and military platforms, amongst the top one or two in the world for so many years. But recently, the initiatives announced by the Raksha Mantri, based on the Prime Minister's desire that we must become more and more self-sufficient, part of Aatmanirbharta, India has already crossed the 8,000 crore mark in defense exports, and it is looking at a target of 35,000 crores or upwards by 2025. Very large numbers to those who traditionally saw India as only picking up all the weapon systems it could from various parts of the country, leading at least one set of authors to write a book titled India's Ad Hoc Arsenal. But now, India is now becoming a competitor and hopes to be amongst the top 20 countries in the next several years as a defense exporter. Modest but encouraging targets, and we have two experts with us. We have General Ravi Arora. Welcome back on the show again, sir.
Thank you.
General Saab has had a distinguished military career and now is the publisher of the Indian Military Review and has got some very well thought through views on a number of issues of national security. And we have for the first time with us Mr. Sunil Mishra on the show, who is the Director General of the Society of Indian Defence Manufacturers, SIDM, commonly known as SIDM, and he will be able to tell us really where the defence manufacturing community is feeling the encouragement and at the same time feeling that the impediments still remain. So, Mr. Mishra, I'll start with you. That the recent Defence Expo that has happened in Gujarat seems to have done something which has taken many of us by surprise. For example, in the Def Expo, we have focused on homemade products. It was traditionally seen as a place where all the big arms manufacturers of the world would come and display their hardware. But this time, we are displaying what we have, and it's probably the biggest in Asia, I'm told. How do we then give the armed forces the opportunity to weigh their choices between what we are making at home and what could be the best bang for their buck from outside?
Maroof, there has been a tectonic shift in the last few years.
Ji.
The paradigm which was there earlier, and you rightly said, that we were the largest, one of the largest importers of arms. Some of the things which we were manufacturing were being manufactured at the Ordnance Factory Board factories and the defense PSUs over a period of time, long time. Indian private sector was on the margins, was on the periphery. Some amount of thought started post Kargil, when it was felt that indigenous manufacturers, we need to give that impetus because we can't depend on suppliers from outside. If your guns don't have the bullets and we are dependent on somebody else, it can be a very difficult situation. But it took a lot of time, and in the last 5 to 7 years, I think very conducive policies have been put into place for defense manufacturing. Indian industry has also now identified that this is a new business opportunity, and there are at least 10 to 15 large companies, large players who have been there now for quite some time. I have been traveling across the country in the last 1 year or so after COVID, and I find that Indian industry, and when I say Indian industry, it is not only the large, but medium and small scale industry, also has a lot of interest in this new emerging opportunity in the defense sector. They are not capable, that the capability of medium scale enterprise would not be to make any systems or become a OEM, but they can certainly be part of the supply chain.
Okay. So, General Sir, you have something to say, then I'll ask you.
You've raised a very pertinent point. Your point is, how do the Indian Armed Forces decide from what is available, what they saw in Def Expo, in the absence of foreign equipment in this show? Now, the answer is a little complex. As Sunil pointed out, we are the second largest arms importer. We are the third largest military spender, but we also figure at the bottom of the 25 top countries who are exporting. But mind you, how much we are exporting? Latest figures say 13,000 crore rupees worth during the year, which is 0.2% of global arms exports.
Right.
Now, this is a paradox. Why are we not able to export? We will come to later. But now, here comes the crux point about the armed forces. And I want to tell you that the global arms industry is fiercely competitive. They are cutthroat. They have no morals. They have no scruples.
Absolutely.
There are kickbacks involved. They don't let other players come in. But they also offer high technology, next generation weapons, which we are not yet able to offer. Now, when indigenous equipment was displayed this time, the armed forces really have not been involved in their development. Here I want to bring up how the British do it, and that is an example to follow. And I'm bringing out this example because when I did a course there, we were asked to do a case study on this. The British had a light gun, which they called L118. They developed it because the existing gun, the 105 Auto Melara, had some lethality issue, range problems. They said, we will develop. Whenever the British develop a weapon for themselves, their approach is to go from export point of view. They need only 140 pieces of that gun, but they want to export 4,000 of them.
I'm aware.
They cannot afford it otherwise, and that is their business model. They give impetus to their own ordnance factories as well as private industry. So they took 11 years to develop this gun, and then this gun, they took 140 pieces, but 4,000 pieces were exported to 16 countries, and some of them are still in use. India was motivated to develop the Indian field gun or the Indian light gun based on the British L118. Now look at their other weapons also. Their Challenger 1, their Striker APC, so many of their weapons. Similarly Sweden, the Carl Gustav, which has gone to 40 countries. The Gripen, 16 countries have showed interest in that. They have the RBS 90 manpad system, again gone to about 8 countries. So these countries, they develop systems, they use it for themselves, they offer complete systems with support, and they are high technology.
Okay,
I think the Indian Armed Forces should also get involved with Indian industry from the design and development stage.
Sir, it's a point that has been brought up on a number of occasions earlier. Couple of issues in response to your points. Your last point, the Navy has a very well-organized design bureau, and the INS Vikrant, back in the high seas again, the second generation Vikrant, is a lot of credit must go to the Navy's design bureau, who worked very closely with Cochin Shipyard. And I am also familiar with the British and Swedish models, having myself visited both their infrastructures. And a point that you brought out, some of our field formations, 16 Corps is a case in point, are larger than the entire British Army. And so we have a very large military setup, and it was always surprising why we were not looking at our internal manufacturing. And when somebody was doing that, they had to have enormous patience to be given the time to show their product in the light of day. I recently visited the infrastructure of Bharat Forge. I was fascinated to see that they were producing 1 barrel a day for their ATAGS gun, which is now, I'm told, achieving ranges of up to 48 kilometers, which is more than any other medium gun in the world. And it has overcome all the trial challenges that were there. But Mishra Saab, I want to understand from you that where you think the focus of the government's spending would be now in internal production. I'm told that the government has identified a target of 1.7 lakh crores for defense production up to 2025, and in which they would be then be able to also meet the 35,000 crores export target. There are issues of self-reliance, but also I think this has been a bit late, but not so late that we can't reverse the clock, that the offset guidelines have been changed. The government is also incentivizing production by making it easier to obtain licenses. The government is also providing encouragement by simplifying the acquisition process, because not everything, including INS Vikrant, is made in India. There are still a lot of parts that have to come from outside. So, you as the head of the body of Indian defense manufacturers, where do you see that the steps would enhance our production, or do we need to do more?
3 buckets of production. One is, again, DPSUs and the OFB factories.
Ji.
Foreign OEMs who have been here for long, and the emerging Indian private sector. I see a good growth in the Indian private sector, which is now going to become more aggressive. And as you mentioned about Bharat Forge, a lot of work is being done at Mahindra Defense, Tata Advanced Systems, and many other manufacturers who are making lethal or non-lethal products. A case in point, small cities, cities like Kanpur, where last 25 years a company has developed into body armor and is now supplying to 100 countries. There are success stories like this.
Yeah.
And private sector has, if you provide the right environment and the right legislative framework, private sector of our country and the entrepreneur of our country is capable enough to find its own way.
Absolutely.
And find overseas markets also. I now see, because the policy framework has been put into place very nicely, and Indian industry, private sector, Indian entrepreneur, which is perhaps the best in the world, is now at it. I don't think there will be any looking back.
Any looking back.
Foreign OEMs are having a lot of interest, and we also need them. And they have been trying to develop a lot of vendor base in India, where we are helping them. Offset or no offset, offset is not the driving force ultimately for a large FOEM investment. Initially, it's a good thing to do, but over the period of time, I think it's a good decision that if we are not concentrating.
And also the fact is that, if you really look back over the last 10 years, we've hardly got any returns from this offset clause.
Yeah.
The reality is one thing to announce that.
Correct.
But अगर कोई कुछ बना रहा है, तो why would he give back, or बेच रहा है, why would he give back 30% of his earnings back into offset?
Correct.
The arms industry, as General Arora has just brought out, they work on a very cutthroat agenda. They have very, very clearly laid out margins, and they're not going to part with those margins very easily. General Sir, I've been keen to ask you this question. You see, the government has laid out a number of the first list and the second list, and a number of items are there which are allowed or blacklisted. Now, the problem that comes up is that one of the things that I noticed, look at India's missile program. Because there were restrictions on India buying from outside, we ended up producing world-class missile systems and satellites, right? Here, there were no restrictions. And I remember a very senior bureaucrat telling me about 10 years ago in the MOD that, if you lay out 5-10 year deadlines, that within this time you buy what you want to, but after that you got to make use of what is there in India. So do you think that same kind of principle applies to this first list or the second list? Or, as one chief at least told me, army chief, that we end up only getting stuff which we require as part of a crucial requirement? Long-term perspective planning, LTPP, which people talk about, is not really there on the ground. Your view, sir?
So, Maroof, the purpose of these lists is twofold. If you notice these lists, there is one list of 2,851 items for indigenization. The other lists are for, and there is one more list for indigenizing LRUs and sub-assemblies.
Ji.
This is mainly to reduce the foreign content in your systems, indigenization. The other is they have said that 18 major items will be sourced from domestic industry. There is a list of 107 items which have been banned from import.
Yes.
So it will go to Indian industry, whether public sector or private. So this is to give impetus to domestic manufacturing. You have to increase the base of domestic manufacturing if you have to meet those targets of 35,000 rupees exports by 2025. Because remember, our capital procurement next year is going to be 154,000 crore rupees. To have 35,000 crore rupees worth of exports, you need domestic capacity. We don't have that capacity. You are giving ambitious targets because, well, hopefully much of it will be achieved. You're not giving shallow targets. These are ambitious, which is a good thing by itself. That brings your point that, there is one way to do is that you prohibit them from importing, they will be forced to make. And second is give them ambitious targets, at least part of it will be met. The second part is, now look at all the equipment that we are manufacturing for ourselves. There is very little which has been designed and developed indigenously, and that too has got from 40 to 70% foreign content. It's not, or you can say 40 to 70% is indigenous. When you have to export, now I'll give you the examples. Start from rifle. We don't have a rifle. We are going to manufacture the AK-203 under license. We can't export it. To meet our own requirement will take time. You have the Carl Gustav, which is our anti-tank weapon. You have the, the tank, our main tank is T-90, again under license. Similarly, in the Air Force and in the Navy, we have a few items, LCA, Advanced Light Helicopter, Light Combat Helicopter, and yes, missiles are a success story. But to export them, they must have indigenous content. There should be no strings attached to when they are exported. So these lists are going to help in reducing foreign content, making it indigenous, because when you export, you want the whole system. They want a complete package, including spares, including MRO, including training, everything. And these are the big ticket items, the helicopters, the missiles. These are the big ticket items which by value are going to hike your export and meet those targets.
Understood.
So as far as the lists go, this is the purpose that they serve, and we are on the right track. It's not that, the exports are low at the moment. So as and when the capacity increases, but one more point is to the industry is shying away from, even when the government is offering, and Sunil Mishra can throw light on it, even when the government offers money for R&D to private industry, there are no takers. That's a paradox. I mean,
Okay, Mr. Saab, how do you respond to that before I ask you the bigger question?
See, the money on the R&D has been announced in the recent budget by the Honorable Finance Minister that 25% of the R&D budget will be utilized by the private sector. Now, there's still the mechanism is to be created. It is work in progress, and Indian industry does want to utilize that money. I think we are trying to find the right mechanics
I
to access
suppose,
that.
all these things, there is the devil is in the details.
That's right.
And the announcement is one thing, but how do you go about it? We are seen in various areas, even after an announcement is made, to
It
get
takes
it
time.
implemented
Takes time.
is a process. But I want to ask you on export. General has talked a lot about exports. We have got a good export order for BrahMos missiles.
Yeah.
We have got a lot of Southeast Asian countries that are showing interest in BrahMos, other than Philippines, which is more or less pretty certain about taking it. But we are also getting orders. He talked about the success stories of Indian missiles. What I was pleasantly surprised was to see that not only were we getting it from Southeast Asian countries, but we are also getting it from countries like Egypt, which is now looking at an order for the LCA aircraft. Now, that I think is a major leap forward. Your views?
See, not all countries require fighter aircrafts of 4.5 generation.
Yes.
Their needs are met by an LCA, which we have.
That was earlier my point, even at the highest level, including some of my writings, that not everybody is looking for a Rafale or an F-18 or whatever else. An LCA, if it can serve the purpose of our Air Force, certainly can serve the purpose of our smaller neighbors next door.
See, I am receiving foreign delegations today, at least 2 a month. 2 delegations from overseas, military delegations, are coming to India, which we are receiving, hosting them in different parts of the country. African nations, Africa in a big way. Africa, in fact, we had Africa-India dialogue at the DEF Expo day before yesterday. DEF Expo, if I take it as a measure, there were 70 countries which were visiting, either led by their defense ministers or a high-powered military delegation, scouting for weapons. The interest from Central Asian countries, Southeastern countries, even Latin American countries is very, very high. So this 13,000 crore worth of export which we have achieved in the recent past, and we have got some place in the CIPRI list, is bound to increase. This is again private sector led. There is a huge amount of opportunity available in the DPSUs and again ordnance factory, because their capacities, built up capacities are very large. What they require is an injection of entrepreneurship, an entrepreneurial injection, because in the framework in which they operate, given that capacity which they have, if that can be utilized by risk taking, by getting a CEO who works with the existing CMD, that will perhaps give us an impetus which is very much required.
Jen sir, last question. There's often been a complaint that DPSUs and even now the revamped ordnance factories, they thrive on a culture of nepotism, and the fact that there is a great reluctance to allow the private sector to merge with them, at least on some projects. And we talked about Tata Advanced Systems, we talked about Mahindra Defence, we've talked about Bharat Forge and so many others. Why do you think that there is this reluctance? How can it be overcome? if all of India's energies can be put together to make truly Indian products world class and Atmanirbhar achieved at a greater degree.
You answered you gave the answer in your question. It is patronage from the MOD that the orders go to or are reserved for, or they are given preference in these orders. There is no reason why. 13,000 rupees worth of exports achieved. What is the role of DPSUs in it? 10%. 90% is because of the private sector. Because why? It's easy to see. Because the quality of the products coming from DPSUs is not up to the standard. It's improving, and especially after corporatization, there is more accountability and responsibility. So it's improving, but this shows that you must give more reliance to the private sector. And what Mr. Sunil Mishra said, and you mentioned that even Egypt is going in or considering the LCA. Now there are these traditional arms importers who import a lot. Egypt is one of them. South Korea is another. But they rely more on Western countries. Western countries are, of course, the major exporters. They won't easily allow India to enter into this club.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head.
So what Sunil said, for the time being, it's not a bad idea to focus on West Asia, Southeast Asian countries, African countries, Indian Ocean Rim countries. But I want to add here, the foreign systems, the government organizations, and even our military attaches have been roped into promoting defense exports. They can't handle these systems in foreign countries. I am calling systems in inverted commas.
Right.
You have to have representation, even in the consulates or embassies, from people like SIDM, who know the civilian way of functioning.
I cannot agree more with you, sir. This was one of the ideas in one of my writings, that you have to expand the mandate of those who've been traditionally only designed to buy. You have to create now new teams of people through serving officers and the industry who are going to be trained to sell. But that is a challenge that will have to be met. The ideas are there, the resources are there in the country, and the inputs have been provided by two brilliant minds today. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for your inputs. Until our next episode, goodbye.